The English language can be confusing when discussing a topic that not all parties are familiar with. Now, this can happen for many reasons. One of my favorites is the noun-adjective ambiguity. This happens when it becomes unclear if the adjective is describing what a thing is made of or what a thing is for. There are some great examples in English, such as baby oil, Apple computer, or paperweight. Now, I got to thinking, what might a food thermometer look like? A thermometer made of food. And then it occurred to me, many kinds of fish are contaminated with mercury, and mercury is what you use in thermometers. So the question then had to be answered. How many cans of tuna would it take to make one thermometer? Bioaccumulation is the process that leads to the buildup of mercury in tuna and other breeds of fish. Now this happens because in the environment there are trace amounts of mercury. This comes from volcanoes, human processes, and there are other naturally occurring sources as well. Now, the small amount of mercury in itself really isn't a problem. It gets into the small fish and they absorb it from their environment. And the small amount doesn't harm them. But what ends up happening? The small fish are eaten by slightly larger fish. And not all the mercury ingested is able to be removed from their bodies. So what happens? It begins to accumulate. And now these medium fish get eaten by large fish, and again, the level rises. And this process continues until we reach the apex predators, such as sharks, swordfish, and certain breeds of tuna. Now, at the very top, we find the highest levels of mercury. Now, this is why the FDA recommends not eating certain kinds of fish too frequently. Light canned tuna has 0.13 micrograms per gram, or parts per million, of mercury in their meat. This means that for every gram of meat, you have 0.13 micrograms of mercury. And then as you can see from the chart, the higher up the food chain we go, the higher the concentration. Mercury can come in many forms. In its elemental form, it is a silver liquid at room temperature. But there is also inorganic mercury, which is just mercury in a compound, and there is also organic mercury, which is just mercury in a compound that contains carbon. Methyl mercury is the kind of mercury that bioaccumulates in fish, and this is what we're most interested in. But it has to be turned into elemental mercury, the kind of mercury found in thermometers, to be useful for our thought experiment today. I'd like to clarify something real quick. All these different kinds of mercury are in fact different. Now, the change from one form into another is no simple task, and today we're not going to go into that. But if you are interested, please check the references below for some methods. As humans, we've been using mercury medicinally for a very long time now. The practice dates as far back as ancient China and ancient Egypt. Now, if you didn't have an understanding of modern science, you would be forgiven for looking at mercury and assuming it was imbued with magical mystical properties. Again, remember, we're talking about a time before smartphones and TikTok. Imagine looking at a pool of this reflective, silvery liquid that was just denser than any other liquid you'd ever held. Of course, it'd be the key to immortality. Now, that was what the Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China in the 3rd century BC assumed. He was fed large amounts of it by his physicians, until he went mad and died an early death at the age of 49. Now, as crazy as that might sound, imagine being fed these large amounts of mercury by your physicians, having explosive diarrhea the whole time, and not thinking to yourself that it might be a scam. In Victorian era England, hatters would use mercurious nitrate, a form of mercury, and they would use this to cure their felt hats to make them nice and stiff. Because back then, in Victorian England, if you were walking around with a floppy hat, you obviously had no swag. Now, in the beginning, this would lead to mouth sores, digestive issues, and slight irritability. But with time, this would develop into going crazy. Now, this is why we have the term Mad Hatter. They did not know what was making their hatters mad, but they knew it was happening. Mercury was also used in the treatment of syphilis. This is because mercury has antibacterial properties, because it's generally anti-life. Now, this would happen because you'd put the mercury on a skin rash or on a lesion, and it would kill the bacteria and would help to alleviate the rash. And syphilis starts out as rashes. It's one of its first symptoms. And it only made sense to continue the treatment as the disease progressed. Unfortunately, it did nothing to stop or slow the disease. Lewis and Clark brought mercury pills with them on their trip across Louisiana Purchase. Now they did this because it was extremely effective at treating constipation. Who knew that poisoning yourself might have some benefits? So I used to work in a lab. This was many years ago. And I worked with this old man. And we had a vial of mercury in the lab. And I had no idea what it was for. And I asked him, what is this for? And he also didn't know why it was there. It predated him. But he told me that back in the day, in the Wild West, cowboys would take mercury as a game. And the game was to take the mercury and see who could go the longest without needing to go to the bathroom. Now, I can't think of anything funnier than that. I can't find any references for it online, so I doubt it actually happened. But just the thought of two tough and rugged cowboys facing each other off, all clenched up, not to be the loser who had to go to the bathroom. Now, just a thought, but maybe we can get this ready just in time for the next Olympic Games. Can even think of a few companies who might want to sponsor. Mercury has been used to treat a variety of conditions throughout history. These include melancholy, venereal disease, parasites, and constipation. Actually works for that one. Now, they believe this because mercury would give you diarrhea and it would make your stools black. Now, this was believed to be from an excess of bile leaving your body because they believed that bile was one of the four humors, and the balance of these four humors was very important to your health. Nowadays, we are so much smarter than these ancient peoples. They didn't understand germ theory, they believed in silly things such as the four humors, and they didn't even realize that their medicine was a poison. On a completely unrelated note, today we use mercury in dental implants, as planets, as musicians, and as preservatives and vaccines that we inject directly into our bodies, even though we have perfectly viable alternatives for all of the above. From a quick Google search, I learned that you would need about half a gram of mercury to make one small thermometer. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but hang in there. Assuming 100% extraction efficiency from canned tuna, that would take 3,846.15 kilos of canned tuna meat to make one small thermometer. This can that I got from Walmart has 4 ounces or 113 grams of tuna. To get enough mercury, you would need 34,037 cans to make one small thermometer. If you use canned albacore tuna, you would need only 12,643 cans to make a thermometer. And swordfish has some of the highest levels of mercury contamination, so it would only take 500 kilograms of swordfish meat to make one small thermometer. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, you might be wondering what my thoughts are on whether or not you should eat canned tuna. Now, you probably shouldn't be getting advice from guys like me on the internet, but since you're here, I'll give it to you anyway. Canned tuna is gross and you shouldn't be eating it. It has nothing to do with the mercury, it just has a gross smell and I don't like it. And I have the exact same thoughts about mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is gross, and I rationalize it by saying it can give you salmonella, which is true and it has killed people. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is I just think it's gross and I don't like the smell. But in case you need another reason not to ask for mayo, please check out this news story about a man who gets shot for asking for extra mayo. Until next time on Oxy Midway.